acronym, I have no idea what the heck that, how to pronounce it, or I wanted to say sponsor the program's administration, because then it would be spa, and it would be happy, and people would want to come and see us. So it's not spa-like. We're on the 3rd floor. We moved down to the 3rd floor. So it might be hard to find us, but worth the effort, I promise you. We are in, now in the suite 3300. So that's right. The first thing that I just want to let you know is we are not a bank. A lot of people come to us and ask us for money, and I wish I had money to give you. I used to have money to give you, but I no longer have money to give you. We handle any grant, any searches for external funding, so applications for external funding. There's a whole other office housed within the provost office that has internal money. And so before we get started on external money, I just want to put out there is internal money. The person whose door you should be knocking on for internal money is Rachel Sponzo, S-P-O-N-Z-O. And I don't put it in the thing in case she's ever at one of the workshops and she sees that I'm giving out her information. Rachel's a lovely person, and she's the person who administers things like the writing fellowships for that final write-up year. That deadline is usually January 15th, so I always say if you are, you've advanced to level 3, you're advanced to candidacy, put January 15th as a recurring deadline on your calendar. Actually put November 15th as a recurring deadline on your calendar, that it's due in January, so you can prepare an application to that writing year fellowship. That's a really good thing to just kind of keep out there. So what we do is anything that's externally funded, meaning there is some agency outside of CUNY that is going to give you money for your research. We deal with something that's called restricted funding. So it's not a gift, it's not some private benefactor who's going to hand you a check for $50,000 to do your research, no strings attached. This is, you actually have to put in an application that stipulates what kind of research you're going to do and the cost associated with it, and then follow that. And it functions as a contract, so it becomes a formal written agreement. The formal written agreement can happen between you and the funder directly. Like I said, you might never need to interact with us, and that's, you know, we won't know. But a lot of times, certainly for federal money, and sometimes state money as well, and some of the other bigger funders, it has to be a formal written agreement between the institution and the funder. There are opportunities for students to get funded as individuals from funders, but again, like, we probably won't see you unless it's something that's going to say the money will come to the institution and they'll disperse it to you. So here's the things we can do. The first thing that you want to do, that everyone wants to know, is how do I find out about opportunities? We can show you how to figure that out, and we'll cover some of that today. We can help you prepare a more competitive proposal. The thing that frustrates me the most in working with students is that I will hear from students about 2 weeks before it's due, and they'll say, is there any chance you can look at this? And if it is one of the bigger deadlines, or there's a cluster of deadlines occurring around that time, chances are I will have no opportunity to do it. This is the staff that you will see. There's 2 of us, and there's one other person who you might interact with. Her name is Hillary Fisher. But usually if you're interacting with Hillary Fisher, you've gotten the money, and she's helping you on the other side in the post-award. So she becomes a person people love to see because they have money. We do assist in post-award funding. If you do get your award and it comes to us, there is a separate, of course, CUNY entity among the bureaucracy that is basically what I call, they're kind of like a bank for us. They're called the Research Foundation. They hold the money, they create an account for you, it's basically a bunch of accountants and lawyers making sure that you don't get into trouble. They prepare fiscal reporting for you, if it's a contract situation, they review the contracts to reduce risk and all that kind of good stuff. But again, they are accountants and lawyers, they don't do research. So, probably the best thing I can say is one of the major functions of our office is to help you negotiate that level of bureaucracy and to help you out if you have an award for the work.
Can I ask a real quick
Yeah,
question?
sure.
So sort of more generally, discuss it more general, right? So firstly about what are the tax implications if you get awards? Are there tax
Depends-
implications to that?
Depends on the funder.
And then secondly, in terms of multiple awards, is there something we should be careful about that, and how do we negotiate that?
Okay, that is the best situation to be in, and again, it absolutely is dependent on the funder. Some depends on the terms of how they're giving that money to you. We are not allowed to give you any tax advice, so I'm just gonna say right now, you would need to consult your personal tax accountant should you receive an award that has funding for salary or stipend. If you're getting funding that's coming through the institution to fund direct cost materials, supplies, computer, travel tickets, that kind of stuff, that isn't considered income. That's research materials funding, so that would not affect you tax-wise. But if you are, so again, not allowed to give you tax advice on it, talk to your accountant. When you have multiple funders, and we are really, I look at the caliber of GC students as being so completely top-notch, because we do every year have students who are winning multiple awards, and not little ones, like big ones, like people are coming in with, you know, Wintergren or Social Science Research Council, National Science Foundation, Fulbright, all 3 or 4, sometimes 4, and they just look at me and go like, ah, because the guidelines for each grant are incredibly specific about what they will cover and what they won't cover. But the big funders understand that you're applying for multiple awards, and so frequently we'll say, we're going to award you, but the question we're asking is, did you get other funding? And if the answer is yes, you can rewrite your budget, so that you're making sure that you're making your budget specific to the funder and what they're gonna cover. Because when you do the application, you don't know what you're gonna get, so you're asking for everything. And that's one of the things that we help you with, to figure out that you're not going to get in trouble by charging the same cost to multiple grants, because you can't do that. So we would help you if you got multiple awards. And it will likely affect whatever, it may or may not affect whatever funding you're getting already. So, from the GC. So if you've got internal funding for the GC, that's a whole separate issue. So, yes, did that answer? Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. There are lots of reasons why you should be applying anyway. I'm assuming at this stage of the game, because I'm assuming you are all, I just launched in without asking you, how many people here are level 3? And level 2? Students? All right, cool. All right, we got there. If you are level 1, it is likely that the things that you're applying for will be coming directly from the funder to you. In those cases, the funder is most likely, we'll get to search in a second, the funder is most likely looking to invest in you as an individual researcher, and their concern in how you put together those applications. It's really more about you. I mean, they're interested in your research, but they're interested in you as a person. If you're level 3, chances are they're really interested in what your research is about, and they really, the sort of the ratio of how much they care about who you are starts to drop off as you hit level 3. So how you prepare those 2 different kinds of applications, they're really different in the kinds of statements you need to make. How do you search to figure out what kind of funding opportunities are available to you? I suggest actually going to the library and working in the library to do this. We subscribe to multiple databases. Pivot?
Pivot, grants.gov, Workspace, 2 other ones.
Let me remember them all. So Pivot is usually the one that people use the most. We work with Foundation Directory Online. Grants.gov you can search through, but that's a government, it's a federal. Yeah, it's all federal opportunities, so just imagine a federal website. That's probably not the one you want to start with. We usually like people to start with Pivot, and so if you just go to the library's main page, it has a list of databases by alphabetical order. Go to Pivot, and it gives you a bunch of different search terms that you can put in and to define how you want to do the search. Doing a comprehensive search the first time usually takes 10 hours, 12 hours. of really sorting through these. What happens is, if you put in search terms that are too general, you're gonna get this huge flood of results, most of which don't apply. Or if you do things that are too specific, it's gonna end up giving you like one thing back. The reason I suggest going to the library is we have research librarians there who will help you suss out the beautiful balance of search terms. So if you happen to be here, since you're here anyway, carve out a little time and go down, just to do maybe a first search with the librarian. We also subscribe to the Foundation Directory online. And the Foundation Directory is exactly that, a directory of all foundations that support research and other kinds of programs in education. The Foundation Directory identifies who funds this stuff. But it's less good at telling you when there's an actual request for proposals or there's a deadline coming up or that kind of thing. What's good about it is if you're looking through the Foundation Directory, you will begin to become familiar with who funds research in sort of your field and who funds research sort of like what you do. And then you can kind of dig into that institution or funder a little bit more to see how closely aligned they are with what you do. For both of these databases, it's going to take you from this search to the specific funder. And when you're looking at, the reason why I say you're going to need 10 or 12 hours to sort through this is not because you're going to have such a huge list of funders. It's because once you have, a good short list of people who fund what you do, you're going to want to dig into and ask certain questions of that institution or that entity. Specifically, what did they fund last year? What was their operating budget? What was their giveaway amount for last year? And do they have the same level of funding to give away again this year? And once you start to look at that, the reason why I asked you to look at those things is, on a public-facing website announcing the mission of this particular funder, especially private funders, it's going to have what their mission is and what they're interested in doing. But if they've recently had a change of a director, if they have a newly activated board of directors, their focus might be just slightly moving away from that. And you don't want to go through, you might read that and think, oh, we are a perfect fit, this is exactly what I do. But then when you go and look what they funded last year, it's like, maybe not such a good fit. So that's what you need to be aware of, in that private funders can go, there's flexibility within that mission of what they want to support. So that's why you might want to dig in a little more and just check and see what they did. Also look at the amount of the awards, and if they're a national agency or a national funder, look at the geographic distribution of the awards. You can also, in the guidelines of anything they have for how you submit, there are going to be these things, well, here's our mission and this is what we strive to support and blah, 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 blah. Take a look and see if they have anything there that says something about geographic parity. Because if they're looking for a national equal distribution, there are going to be more likely a concentration of applications coming from New York City. New York City, the California system, some of the bigger cities are going to have this onslaught of people looking for funding. And these are the kind of things you want to think about when you're prioritizing to whom you're going to apply. Because you don't want to spend all of your time applying for funding, you also need to do research, and you have a whole boatload of other things you need to be doing than this. So that's one of the things to be careful of when you're doing this search. Look at who are they funding, look at how much they had last year, and do they still have that same amount of money. In the current economic crisis, and probably for the last 9 years or so, this can vary wildly from year to year. It's depending on the source of their funds. It also depends on things, especially for private foundations. What else is happening in the world? If there has been a natural disaster, frequently private foundations will divert some of their money to a new special thing to address things that are happening in the world like that. It happened after Katrina, it happened after Sandy, with their string of hurricanes, Irma and Henry and every other hurricane you can think of. I work in the Caribbean, so all the hurricanes are top of mind for me, I'm sorry. So those funding can divert that way. So, you know, so again, just like be mindful of that, or look at their track record and see how does their amount for funding fluctuate. And if last year they gave it all away and this year everything seems to be on, you get a sense of what the success rate is. I also kind of say, like, don't get freaked out by the success rate. Because sometimes people look at it and they go, oh, there's only an 8% chance of me actually getting this funding. You have as good a chance as anybody. And it really comes down to, is it on mission? How good a fit it is. If you think about, of the 100% of applications that get submitted, I would bet at least 50% of them have some technical issue and are not going to be reviewed based on having a technical issue. So there, so 50% weren't funded for that reason. There's gonna be another chunk that did not, who while are technically compliant with the request of the funder, have missed something in demonstrating their fit to apply to this particular funder. And once you eliminate those groups of folks, your success rate goes up much higher. So at the point of searching for funding is where you can eliminate those that you are like, yeah, they fund stuff sort of like what I do, but it seems to be like just a half a step off mission based on what they funded over the last couple of years. I'll put them to the bottom of my list of who I'm gonna apply to. Because that's where you know you're really falling into that 8% category. If you find somebody that's like in lockstep, right on board with what they've funded things in the past that are, your research is so on mission with them, you just moved up the ranks. So as long as you're technically compliant with what they need you to send them, and you make sure that you begin to treat that document, every piece of it, as a holistic document, your proposal becomes more and more competitive. Did I say any of that? I don't know. I don't know, just, we're waiting. All right, now we're gonna skip that. Oh yeah, look at that, databases. All right, here we go. The biggest challenge that we see always is people don't read the guidelines. So I'm just gonna say, please read the guidelines. Like, I cannot say this more strongly. And it's not students, it's everyone, including faculty and senior administration and anybody who ever submitted a proposal through our office. Please read the guidelines. Is there faculty in here? Let's see. Okay, so where we run into trouble with faculty in here sometimes, across departments, is they've had students applying for, say, something like the National Science Foundation Dissertation Improvement Grants for years, and maybe not in the last 2 years or so, and then they're telling you what you need to do in order to apply for that. And the problem is all of the federal agencies in the last 2 years have completely changed their online systems. So the formatting requirements are different, some of the documents are different, and they're now beginning to, across the board, ask for similar things. So what might have been required in one division is now being required in others. So your advisors have sort of two functions in your application, two real functions, in my opinion, in your application process. They can help you identify where you should be applying because they know what funders fund the kind of research y'all are doing sometimes. And they are there to make sure that your research design is as well-structured and well-written as it can be. And then they have to also comply with things like Is it required that your advisor submit a certain format of their own CV? Do they have to fill out a conflict of interest? Do they have to put in some kind of statement? And so if you have read the guidelines, you know what's required of your advisor. And it's important that you communicate that to your advisor as soon as possible. In some cases, we have advisors whose research takes them outside of the country, or they're on sabbatical, or they are away for whatever reason, out of contact maybe, during the time that you're in the midst of really, maybe it's just break, and you're in the midst of trying to put this application together, and you need things from them. I can help you track them down. I can help you pull things together. Maybe I have things on file from a previous year that we can tweak into the right format. Like, so for us, in helping you all, the best possible thing you can do is let us know, even if you're thinking about applying to something. If it's something we don't normally encounter, we haven't had a student apply to that, maybe it's been years and we don't remember exactly how what the application process was, or what the new, maybe there have been new changes, we can help you sort that out and figure out what they're really asking you for. Because sometimes it's not clear in the guidelines. And what you don't want to happen is to be at the last minute where getting this in, we have a submission date, we've submitted it, fabulous, we've submitted it 2 days ahead of the deadline, a week ahead of the deadline, 2 weeks ahead of the deadline, and have the agency bounce it back the day after the deadline saying it's missing something, or the margins are wrong, or you put a hyphen in the zip +4 zip code and we cannot accept this application. Those are the things that happen. So we want to make sure that it is technically compliant. That results in tears all around. Okay, so know the guidelines, live them. We will help you interpret them. All right. How often do you write? How many write every month? How many people write every week? Every day? Maybe every day? Yeah, I like it. Political science are right people. I like this. Okay. You have to get into the habit of writing, of course, because you're writing other things. If you're deciding to write a proposal for your research, it's not quite the same as writing, a proposal for funding is slightly different than writing a proposal for proposed research for approval. The language, we want to take out I and we if we're doing project descriptions. One of the things that you have to figure out is who is actually going to be reading this. So if you're looking at applying to a private foundation, it's likely going to be the board of directors of that organization. A quick look, again, when you're prioritizing your research and beginning to sit down and write for one of these, to a funder, say a private funder. Looking at who the board of directors are is really important. You want to see what their expertise is. You don't know why they were asked to be on that. And if they are the people who are going to be reviewing it. That's going to help you decide what the language would be like. And it really should be jargon-free as you can make it. You want it to be concise. And there's a delicate balance between concise, because anyone in my field would know exactly what this means, so I don't need to explain it. And concise, someone in other social sciences might need a little bit more explanation of what you mean by that term. So that's where it becomes important to understand who's going to be on the receiving end of it. I hope the National Science Foundation's Dissertation Improvement Grant as kind of the standard that you want to meet for any application you're making. So I highly recommend just National Science Foundation, doctoral dissertation, political science, and it'll spit up the guidelines. Take a look at that and what's required for that. I hope you're all applying. Are you all fine? If you're level 3 at NSF,
When's the deadline?
January.
Is that the deadline for most of these?
No,
Okay.
they're across the board,
Yeah.
so, if I'm not mistaken, I can't remember now if it's political science, no, I think it's sociology. Each division within the National Science Foundation has slightly different deadlines, which makes it super fun, and slightly different requirements for students who are applying for dissertation improvement. Which means that your budgets are different because the amounts for funding are different. It means that what's required for your advisor to submit along with it as far as letters or are going to be slightly different.
Page limits. Page limits.
Thank you, page limits, that's why you're here, to remind me of those things. Page limits are different between the disciplines, so you have to really be careful of those and to make sure that you're working with the newest version of the guidelines, because sometimes they change them and they'll change slightly, but importantly, like in a page limit, from year to year or even from competition to competition. Some divisions within NSF have 2 deadlines in the year. Usually there's one in January and there's another one over the summer, which are exactly the worst time to get anything out of your advisor. Some divisions are moving to a model where everyone applies in the winter deadline, and only those that were not funded but rated highly are invited to apply in the summer. So when people ask me, well, I'm not quite ready for January, should I apply anyway? I don't know. It depends on your division, and that's something to keep in mind. Some divisions are moving to the model of you cannot resubmit, or you can only resubmit once. So again, like, that could be a question for a program officer, or we can help you get the, like, intel on what's going on in your particular division. So if you've got questions like that, which will not be published publicly anywhere, those are the kind of questions you can come to us with, and we can try and suss that out from, on the phone, on a non-recorded line, call a program officer on their cell phone when they're out of the federal building and say like, hey, what's happening? Yeah, so I'm only sort of kidding. Anyway, so you want your writing to be very clear. This is the other thing that happens. We tend to have people looking for that, like, when they're writing, their writing style, they want this sort of like big, dramatic payoff when you say like, here's the background information, and this is why my research is so fabulous that you should fund it. We ask that you start from flip it. My research is so fabulous and this is why you should fund it. Here's the background information that you need to understand why it's so fabulous. Which is not to say that your reviewers won't read it carefully. It's just that your reviewers are going to be asked to score the application according to the criteria laid out by the funder. And the funder usually lays the criteria scoring rubric out according to the guidelines. So everything that they're asking you should appear in the order it's asked in the guidelines. It should be so easy for someone to know why your research is important. And just make it as easy as possible for your reviewer. There are now a lot of folks, a lot of agencies and funders who are putting in all these, they didn't used to, and I'm really happy that they're doing this now, that you can't have any font smaller than 11. Because, I mean, if you think about the average age of the person reviewing the grants, like, just please don't make 10-point font, we can't see it, it is aesthetic and get cranky. Anyway, like, follow those kind of guidelines, all the technical guidelines for, even if it feels repetitive, it's this really artificial sort of, it's not beautiful, it's not a beautiful flowing way to write about what you do. It's this very contrived way of writing about your research. And it sometimes feels that way when you're writing it, but either how it prints out to the reviewer or how they're instructed to review it, it's that way for a reason, so don't mess with it, just go. You want to make sure that if they're asking you to address something specific in the guidelines, that you address it specifically. For example, National Science Foundation requires that you address their two criteria. One is broader impacts and the other is intellectual merit. In your proposal, make a heading that says intellectual merit and the paragraph about that, broader impacts and the paragraph about that.
They will deny it if you don't have
Yeah.
that heading.
If you don't put the heading in, that's new this year.
Yeah.
And what we found is that people would actually write this really compelling reasoning for the intellectual merit and for the broader impacts that their research has the potential to make. But reviewers were having trouble finding it. So now they make you write that heading on there, which can mess with your page limits if you have it separate. So just write broader impacts, colon, and start your paragraph there, just so to give you a couple extra lines, I'm just saying. No?
No,
They're, oh.
they want it completely separate. You have to bold it,
Oh,
completely separate line.
oh, right, okay, that worked 2 years ago, see? Not a bit. All right. You have to talk about why it's important. Please don't tell us it's filling a gap of knowledge in the field. It has to be something beyond that. You can say nobody's ever done this before, but if you say nobody's ever done this before, you better be prepared to say why. Certainly, you could be like the biggest brain and dynamic thinking to ever grace the globe. But chances are, somebody, or you're in such a cutting edge field that everything is fulfilling a gap in knowledge. No one's done this before. You have to be able to answer the question of, well, why hasn't anybody done this before? Is it because there's a lack of data to support what you're asking? Is it because, why? Sometimes the answers can be really interesting, like no one's had access to this collection of data before, or these are things that are newly released, or this phenomenon has occurred in the modern world and now this is something that we have to deal with. This is something new. So that's what you really want to be able to focus on. You can't if that line, it's almost better to not say that at all, because it's like waving a red flag in front of a bull to reviewers, like, oh, great, now let's prove it. They can only judge you by what's on the page. So let's say one of your reviewers is somebody who really understands your research, their own research is very closely aligned with what you do, and they have a nuanced understanding of what you're trying to say, and you put in there, this fulfills a gap in the field, and you don't explain it. That person they can say to the group at large of the review panel, yes, it does, but unless you're saying it, the weight of that will not necessarily carry in the same way. It doesn't carry in the same way. So make sure you're able to defend any claim like that. For National Science Foundation, you have to say why this is innovative. It doesn't have to be the newest thing ever done. It needs to build on things. It can be incremental innovation. It doesn't have to be, transformative. They have a whole separate division that deals with